See where my finger's
Yeah.
pointing? That's Kaya. Kaya's
Yeah.
right there. So yes, I still have my dog.
I've got one of those boxes.
She'll always be with me.
Look at that, Darren. We're live.
Oh, we're live.
Yeah. It's fun having dogs. I'm a definite dog person, but it doesn't come without its challenges, right?
Part of the family. And no, definitely. My daughter, she wants to get a dog again. And I was like, what are you gonna name her? She goes, Kaya. I said, that's a good name. Good name.
Kaya too, maybe?
There may be another dog in my life named Kaya. We'll see.
Well, nothing wrong with that.
No.
My grandfather had huskies growing up, and the first one was Yama, and then the second one was Yama 2. So, and it worked. Worked just fine. Didn't forget the name of his dog. I think it was to show that his mind never slipped. He's like, oh yeah, it's Yama 2. I got it. Don't worry.
My neighbor growing up, his dog, their dog's name was DOG. DOG.
Oh, that's great.
Good one, right?
Yeah, it's like naming, was it DOG and C80?
No, it's just DOG. Oh. That's all they had, just the dog. They actually had a goat, but they didn't name the goat GOAT. They just I don't think they named the goat.
That's really funny because oddly enough, it seems like it actually works. You could
have worked great.
That in GOAT. Who knew? It's a great name. How'd you come up with that? So original. That's funny, man. So I woke up to snow in Albuquerque this morning. I have daffodils and like beautiful spring flowers in my backyard, and woke up to, I don't know, maybe like a half inch of snow. It's all gone now, but it's always nice.
I had a beautiful day today that I woke up to. Yesterday it was 34 degrees in sunny Gainesville, Florida. So we've had some crazy weather. We'll see. Tomorrow is my son's first birthday party. I have a little soiree for him, and it's supposed to be miserable weather all day. Rain, cold. Yeah, perfect.
At least all those kids can go right inside,
Yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. 100%.
It's funny. Well, and I mean, luckily though, Darren, Florida's been making the news, and I don't think it's for the most pleasant reasons. I mean, you guys have a blob the size of the United States heading to your beaches.
A what?
A blob.
Oh, blob? Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, the seaweed blob that apparently is just going to swallow the state of Florida whole.
Yeah. It's always something. Florida's a very special state. I'll tell you that. We've got Florida Man, which is like kind of like a version of Mothman, but way worse. Florida Man is a legend. He takes many shapes and sizes and does all kinds of havoc. It's like that insurance commercial where the guy, he's havoc. That's Florida Man everywhere. We've got our algae blooms every year on both coasts from the Okeechobee, just dumping all the nutrients from all the sugarcane and all the agriculture in the center of the state, just dumping it right out to the beaches. It's all kinds of good things. We've got,
I wonder if Terra Vera could clean up all that seaweed,
Hey, there's always a shot. I'm very interested in I've been working with some citrus folks, and the Asian psyllid has caused rampant damage in citrus. They used to do over 300 million boxes a year. This past year it was around 34 million maybe. So major decline. Put tons of people out of work jobs. So that is one of the endeavors, is to do some pathogen studies, communicating with some folks at the University of Florida on the pathogen side. And pathogens are always around. There's always different types. I was speaking with a group out of Alabama, and they did a lot of work in Argentina with they call smut, which is a peanut pathogen. And they solved the peanut pathogen in Argentina because Mars is a big client, Mars the candy company.
Oh, interesting.
there's a lot of opportunity in solving pathogen issues around the world, globally, in all different forms of agriculture. Obviously, we've talked about pecans, we've talked about coffee, talked about all kinds of stuff. So I think, are we on?
I think we are. Let's get started. So for all of you that are out there that are watching, hello, hello, hello. You've got Caleb Johnson here. You've got Darrin Potter. We're going to do a quick rundown on some root cause. And we'll get started with some quick introductions. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Caleb Johnson. I have been in the cannabis industry for just over 9 years now. I've worked in over 13 different states at this point. I've done everything from operating of dispensaries, cultivation, running of vertically integrated companies, all the way from cashing out people in a dispensary to the VP of operations. So I've got a nice wide swath of experience and knowledge in this space. I now am the director of customer success for Terra Vera. So I directly get to work with all of our clients, help them, design, manage, use, answer questions, make sure that they're happy with Terra Vera. And my partner here in crime, Darrin Potter. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Darrin.
Crime. My name is Darrin Potter. I'm a plant biologist by education. I have been in cannabis, the legal cannabis market since 2008. So what's that, like 15, 16 years. I grew up in agriculture my entire life. That's all we did in South Florida, central South Florida, mostly. The Glades, so U.S. sugar land. We grew mangoes, avocados, all kinds of fun things like that. Cannabis has been part of my life from an agricultural aspect from a very, very young age. So thank you for paying for college and that degree in plant science and biology. Got into the cannabis sector legally in Colorado, because obviously legal market did not exist in Florida. Was a founder at a company called Kind Love in Colorado in early 2010. We did our license there. And then I moved on to a company called The Green Solution, help them build their brand, build their company, won a bunch of awards. It was a good time, had an awesome team, great team we built there. And then I came back to Florida because it's my home state, and I wanted to be one of the first licenses, and was a founder at a company called Grow Healthy. We built the company and sold it. And I've been in the sector for a long time, just doing a lot of growth, building companies, selling some companies, been fortunate, and consulting with a lot of companies. And that's actually how I came across Terra Vera early on, in meeting the CEO. And like many reluctant growers in the space, what works, what doesn't work, what's snake poison, all that fun stuff. Got introduced to Terra Vera, used it, worked, and I wanted to be involved because I like the mission, I like the focus, I like the fact that it actually worked, and it was safe for my employees. And I, had hundreds of employees across the country. I've worked almost every single legal state, including Hawaii at this point. In everything from a VP of operations status to an advisor and consultant. I still do a lot of advising consultants projects, but I work in a fraction role with Terra Vera as a director of market development. So a lot of new technology and developing of the brand and developing relationships inside cannabis and of course outside of cannabis, as we were kind of touching on earlier with everything from coffee to citrus to blueberries, etc. So that is me in a nutshell.
Well, that's a big nutshell there. What?
Been around for a while.
Well, just for everybody that's logged in via the LinkedIn, guys, we are going to hold questions to the end, but please feel free to put them in the chat. We will get to them towards the end of the discussion. Today, like I said, and as you can see on the bottom of the screen, we wanted to start doing a series of talks about all things cannabis. We decided that the best way to start this would be kind of a root cause of crop failure. We've broken this into a couple of different categories, and we think that, from our experience, based on our experience, we've broken it into some simple things that, for some of you that are listening, this may be just a redo of what you already know, but I think we're going to share some really great information out there on ways to think about facilities, way to think about PPE, way to think about, you know, accessing your genetics, vector points, IPM strategies. So we've got a lot to talk about. And Darrin, I think we can just get started. Let's talk about facility design and infrastructure.
Sure.
And, you know, I guess the place where I'm going to start, and kind of the easiest question, is what are the common mistakes that you see based in your experience? What are the most common things that you see?
So I think it's important. You know, one, I think it's really important when you're looking at root causes of crop loss, failure, you know, pest pressure. It doesn't start when you see the problem, right? It starts long before that. And usually it starts with facility design, right? So that's obviously the first topic. And it really depends on what type of infrastructure you're talking about, right? So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat in cultivation. Some people are very much, you know, indoors the only way to grow. Some people are, well, no, full sun, outdoors the only way to go. And there's obviously everything in between. You've got greenhouses, and there's, you know, not one type of greenhouse, right? You got a double poly, you got a polycarbonate. There's a slew of things that you can do. But I think it's really important when you think about infrastructure, and let's just take indoor as an example, the type of structure that you build for the environment that you're growing in. You know, so as an example, if you're building up north, you're probably going to want something that is going to be hardier and withstand the weather, snow load, and things of that nature. If you're close to the coast, right, and if you've got salt and you know, breezy airs like that bring that sodium across your facility. Obviously, people in San Francisco and people on the coast, they might have issues in their cars because they rust out real quick. Well, you got to think about the type of infrastructure you put in there. And then, you know, if you're in the southern regions, it's very hot, and you might think about your mechanical and how you design your mechanical, and obviously up north as well, how you insulate your mechanical and how you bring that into your facility. So infrastructure-wise, there's a lot of details to take account of, and it's really important you hire the right engineering team, of course, but also I think it's really important that people include a cultivator with experience, right? A good amount of experience in designing these facilities, because they're going to think about things from not just an engineering perspective, but also from a workflow perspective and where you place rooms. So, and I'll kind of give an example, and I'm not trying to, I'll never call anybody out. So this is just a client, you know, they brought me in as an advisor, and they're putting an irrigation room very close. They're actually sharing wall with a dry room, you know, and if I could avoid it, I would, right? So that's a very simple potential crop loss concern where, if, yeah, you put berms in, you can put drainage in, you can do all kinds of things, but if that room overflows, and, you know, I think we talked about that, irrigation rooms have a tendency to have some flooding every once in a while. If that gets into your dry room or your vault, you may be experiencing some pathogen pressure, aspergillus, mold, botrytis, etc. So, you know, designing your facility from a floor plan perspective is wildly important when you're taking into consider biosecurity, how people can access, how product moves throughout your facility.
Darrin, I have a quick question that I want to go back to with something that you said. So you hit on something that, again, in my experience, I've seen this quite a few times. Bringing in a cultivator at the very beginning of your build, is that something that you see as common practice? Is there also some pitfalls in that you've seen, bringing in perhaps maybe the wrong cultivator, or somebody that maybe is just cultivation but doesn't have a lot of experience in, say, hey, this is why we don't put a fertigation room next to a cure room?
Yeah. Actually, you know, when I say that, bring in a cultivator, you know, I actually typically like to think of it as more than one, right? A lot of times, you know, I'll use my network as an example. I mean, LinkedIn's a great network, right? You can reach out, and
yep,
there's all kinds of opinions, you know, that you can take or leave on the table. But I think it's very important that you incorporate just thoughts, processes out of, let's just say, your general contractor, right? You want your input from your engineering, from a life safety perspective, and how things flow. You want experience from an operator, and maybe who has some, you know, Six Sigma experience from a flow process and understanding numbers and how things move around. So I think incorporating outside looks like we're in there for a second. I think it's very important to make sure that you include those features when you're designing a facility, because you're going to get a lot out of it. You know, processing specifically as well, making sure that you're bringing in people with a lot of processing experience and how that works.
Awesome. Yeah, that all makes sense. And again, I can back up everything that you're saying, having seen. I mean, I would say I'm probably upwards of 300 to 400 different facilities at this point in my life. There are some very common mistakes that you see. In region is a huge part of it. Not incorporating the correct people from the start of the build is another huge part of it. Not thinking about that production flow and how you're going to get plants from flower to cure, or better yet, veg to flower. There's a lot of these pitfalls that need to be considered, and a lot of things that can really lead to crop loss and pest pressures and cross-contamination. Another big one, Darrin, that comes in with facility and design is your equipment selection. How does, what do you see in this? What are some of the common errors that you see people making when it comes to the equipment that they're choosing? With all the choices that are out there, with all the opinions on LinkedIn, with all the options that you have, I mean, what are the things that really kind of make the most noise to you?
Yeah, so when I'm advising or speaking with somebody about facility and specifically on equipment and your infrastructure type, I always tell people very specific things. Don't cheap out on your mechanical. Don't cheap out on your lights. Don't cheap out on your controls. I totally understand budget restrictions, right? I understand working within a budget, but when you're designing a grow, if you're designing it to operate and not flip it or sell it or something like that, right? Which, there's a value to all of those things. And you want to be a good operator, you have to make the right decisions. And sometimes that means spending a little more money on your controls or your mechanical to ensure that you're creating the right environment. So I'll kind of give you some examples. Very early on, let's call this 2008, 2009, 2010, there were a lot of grows being built, a lot of them in Colorado, Oregon, California, and people were on a budget, right? So instead of using galvanized aluminum framing or anything like that, or insulated panels, or just those types of selections, right? They're using drywall, they're using wood, a lot of it for their base and all that kind of stuff, and putting up a wall. And I can't tell you how many times I've just seen mold all growing up the wall, and studs just completely molded out, which obviously can impact your product, right? So making selections on not just your infrastructure, but obviously your equipment is wildly important, right? I've seen people kind of try to cheap out on controls, and all of a sudden their controls are failing them, so their mechanical's failing them. And when your mechanical fails you, when a sensor fails you, when your controls fail you, a lot of people, let's just take PM. I had this conversation the other day with a client where they were like, "Oh, PM just popped up out of nowhere," and I was like, "Well, you got to understand, PM it's a fungal pathogen. It's a fungus, right? Fungi." So, and I was trying to compare it to him. You ever just walk out of your house and all of a sudden there's just mushrooms all over the ground where they weren't there the day before? I'm like, exactly. It was the right environment for that specific fungal pathogen to just explode. Same thing with your powdery mildew. If your sensors go off and your mechanical shuts down because maybe your motherboard got fried, or maybe you have bad power and you're having brownouts, and that can certainly fry gear. You can have those types of things happen where all of a sudden, boom, you've got a fungal pathogen break out and you're concerned about losing your crop. And, that's where, for Terra Vera, that's where we come in often and fix those problems really, really quickly. It's like, well, we've got a solution for you that's safe for your staff, safe for your employees, safe for your equipment. Man, let's treat this thing and move on.
Well, and again, you hit on something there too, where you're talking about what is seemingly really obvious when you go into one of these builds, but is often overlooked is, your equipment maintenance program. How many people out there don't have a maintenance schedule for the dehumidifiers that they have, and they don't change those filters every cycle, or they don't even know that they have to, or their light bulbs, their fan blades, things of this nature. So it's very easy to get, and picking on PM is great because it's the easiest one to choose. Those spores are everywhere. Just because you're spraying your crop and your flowers and your tables and you're cleaning your tables and everything else, guess what? Those spores are on your fan blades. They're on top of your dehumidifiers. They're on the trim of your walls, all of those types of things. And I think with equipment selection, in my experience, I've seen this as well, where, we oversize the HVAC, but we undersize the airflow. And there is the importance of finding that balance within your environment is absolutely crucial in being able to scale and do this consistently. So I go ahead.
What you just said, I'm gonna put something out there. PM to prevent PM. I can't tell you how many facilities don't have, and there's programs out there. Fix is a great program. Maintain X is a great program. And it just maintenance schedule to fix those problems as they arise, right? Having a really strong facilities team is really important. And some companies either they can't afford it or they don't think about it, right? So they don't put a facilities team in place. And somebody's got to clean the coils, somebody's got to change the filters, somebody's got to do that on a regular basis, or you're certainly going to have a problem. And I see that a lot.
The only other one that I would add in there, Darrin, in my experience, is I'm a huge fan of redundancies when it comes to essential equipment. And if the cost is up front a little high to have a redundancy when it comes to your dehumidification, your lighting, your life support of your garden, I can't recommend it enough to have that in place. And again, have the schedule, have the team in place to be able to manage these kind of unexpected shutdowns, or, hey, things break. It's what happens. So definitely a plan on that. So then the next one. So let's talk about biosecurity and how to incorporate biosecurity. Before we move on, sure.
I just want to touch on one thing really quick, because you said backup, and I just want to make it a point because I do a lot of facility design work, a ton of it. And when people are thinking about backup power, or they're not thinking about backup power, can be, obviously detrimental. You want to consider backup power, and you obviously want to consider what that backup power is going to, right? It doesn't matter if your admin office is running, if your mechanical and your cure rooms, your dry rooms are not functioning, because they're probably, they may not have a job in a couple months if you lose all your products. So when you're thinking about backup, think about backup power generation. I prefer gas because the worst thing, is you've got a backup generator there, but you didn't have any diesel, and now you're in the middle of a hurricane, you're trying to find diesel. Good luck. So think about those things up front, and think about what you're backing up, right? Are you backing up your mechanical? Are you backing up your dry room, your cure room? So just thinking about what you're backing up and how you're doing it is very important. But moving on to biosecurity, I just wanted to get that out there.
And again, Darrin, I couldn't agree with you more. I have seen this in the past where my backup generator is supporting my cultivation, for instance, which is great, but it's not supporting my dry and cure room, which is very bad. So it's a really good point to make. And I do I'm going to take one step before we get into biosecurity, Darrin. Let's talk about production flow, and let's talk about designing your facility from, when I think of production flow, I don't think of it just as, my cultivation or how I get from my lab. I think production starts at the front door in these facilities, rather than in the cultivation. So talk to me about production flow design.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously people entering your facility and your controls of how they enter your facility, whether they're, going into a break room with everybody and going straight into your grow, or whether they're going into a locker room changing, and then your locker rooms have access to your grow. And then obviously how your processing department receives from production, et cetera, even how your materials, your consumables come into your facility, and those individuals having access to kind of very restricted areas, and how your materials are treated coming in, right? Do you have a process to validate that, you know, they're free of heavy metals, free of pests and all of those things as they're coming into your facility? So all of that plays into production flow. And then, you know, let's just take it, if we're talking about cultivation, you know, how your moms produce clones and how far, if you're walking across 4 or 5, you know, veg rooms or flower rooms or whatever, you know, you want things in close proximity. You want things that don't have to pass other rooms. You want to have control of movement, right? To ensure that if you did have a pest pressure area, that you can isolate it, right? And you don't have all of your plants crossing that pest pressure area every single day, or it's not right across to your dry room, right? You have controls in place to ensure that your dry rooms are separated from where your plants are being grown. So if there is any pest pressure or pathogen pressure, it's not going to be transferred over. And then even further into processing, you know, how they receive that material from your cultivation department. And, you know, we're talking about production flow, but I think biosecurity kind of plays such a big role in production flow, because who has access to those areas, right? I work in a lot of facilities that most of the time, you know, you got a card, almost always you have a card, and you've got to scan your card just to get into that area. Well, who has access to those areas? Who has the ability to pull product and move product? Are they changing their scrubs? Things of that nature. So production flow and biosecurity, in my mind, definitely play a role. And they even play a role, you know, not just beyond that in design, you know, some of your infrastructure, making sure that it's not in your production areas so that your maintenance team can get to it and change filters and do those types of things without going into your rooms where your plants, your most valuable assets are outside of your employees. So that's, you know, when I think of production flow, I think of that.
So let me ask, I mean, this might seem like to me, a ridiculous question. I mean, so do you still in today, and I'll leave my experience out of this, do you still see facilities out there where I can walk in wearing the clothes that I'm wearing right now after going into my garden at my house this morning? Do you still wind up in facilities and see facilities being designed where I can come in as a visitor, or I can come in as a contractor without taking any of these steps or considerations that you're speaking about?
I was just at one just a few months ago, right? And that's some of the things we talked about is, you know, it wasn't just from a production flow, it was from facility design and biosecurity, right? Walked into the facility, walked right into the grow, didn't have to scrub in. They didn't have those processes in place. And then, you know, wanted to see the chiller yard. So they walked me right outside, showed me the chiller yard. And, you know, when I see those things, I'm like, oh, I want to help you. We're doing things that I wouldn't do, but I know you're already doing this probably 4 times a day with investors or whatever the case may be. You know, I see that a lot of times with investors as well, right? Bringing investors into the grow, investors touching flowers without gloves on, and then, you know, moving on to go look at 5 other flower rooms. So, you know, we can talk about vectors in a minute, but
yeah. So, and just before we move on is, I mean, to tie all this, the topics of what we've talked about back to root cause and crop loss, you know, I think it's seemingly obvious how if you do not build your facility according to your environment, and your natural surroundings or whatever agricultural region you're in, those numbers and those considerations should be taken. It's obvious that you can lose crop doing that. If you're not choosing the right equipment. So if you have, you know, a shortage of AC, or you have, you know, a shortage of airflow, or your bolts are incorrect, or your tables are not correctly installed, that's an obvious way to lose things. And then also going back into the, you know, the production design and your flow throughout your building, it's seemingly very obvious that this can lead to a lot of problems down the road, and not being able to catch them before it happens. And that's the whole goal of IPM and biosecurity and all the things that we're talking about. So I just want to kind of tie all that together. So Darrin, I think the way that we're just talking about production flow, and biosecurity and those types of things. Maybe some people aren't familiar with what biosecurity maybe means, or what we're necessarily referencing when we say, you know, production flow. But I do think that everybody is aware of people in PPE. So let's just kind of go into PPE and what is, you know, what are the procedure and requirements if in a perfect situation, Darrin, you designed, you know, here are the procedures, here are the requirements. What does that look like for you when somebody walks into your building?
For me, so, you know, I like to incorporate what I have experienced in citrus and in poultry, and it all ties back to biosecurity. You know, if you entered some poultry facilities, especially when there were some significant diseases back not too long ago with poultry, even the truck bringing the site, dropping off materials, they literally drive through like a fog apparatus that cleans the whole, you know, sprays the whole vehicle to ensure they're not bringing in and vectoring issues, right? Same thing in citrus, right? If you're entering a citrus facility or some tissue culture facility, things of that nature, you're going to essentially walk into a chamber and you're going to get hit with a mist cloud of a sterilization solution that's safe for humans, and you're going to walk into your facility, right? So that's part of entering a facility from a biosecurity and safety standpoint. But from a PPE standpoint, and I see this all the time, you know, people oftentimes don't think about where they're walking with their shoes. You know, you talked about working in your garden and then coming into grows. You know, shoes carry everything. You walk outside in them. You know, there's maybe a little crass poop on the ground. You know, I took my daughter to the zoo not too long ago, and she's like, "Dad, what's that white stuff?" I'm like, "That is bird poop." You know, so people are walking all over the place in their shoes, and if you don't have a shoe program or you don't have, you know, good processes to clean your shoes, stepping in a bleach bath or stepping into something that's going to sterilize, there's pads, static pads, of course. There's all different types of ways to address. That's the first issue, right? Making sure people aren't bringing anything from their outside. So, you know, scrubs, good way to do it. There's vending machines now where you can get your daily scrubs, and you get an allotment of 2 scrubs or 3 scrubs a day in the event that you might be going into pest pressure, so you can swap out. And obviously there's smocks. You know, there's suits that you put in regulators and those. That's always a fun thing. Come and look at my facility. I'm going to put you in a space suit so you can't contaminate my facility. So, you know, that is wildly important when anybody, and I'm not talking about just your employees, I'm talking about regulators, I'm talking about investors, I'm talking about executives. Everybody has to follow these protocols to ensure that, you know, the whole point of the industry is producing a plant that's going to pass compliance and be put on the shelves and sold for consumers, whether that's medical or recreational. You have to put a safe product out. And if you're not taking the steps to ensure that you're taking product and ensuring that it's clean and safe for the consumer, then your bottom line is going to be impacted, right? And everybody's in business to make a dollar. So it's really important that people take these considerations: hair nets, beard nets, gloves, shoe programs, scrubs, and using them correctly, right? Putting a hair net on top of a hat where you still got your bill out and you still got everything, you know, hair sticking out of the bottom. And I got long hair. I know this. I was just at a grow yesterday, put it back in the ponytail, you know, put my hair net on because I don't want to cause them issues. I only have a mustache. I don't have a full beard. Still put on my beard net to cover my mustache because, you know, you're coming in from the outside world into, whether it's a greenhouse or not, right? I happen to be at a greenhouse, but still you follow those procedures to reduce the potential impact, to hopefully lower your cost of IPM, your practices, your integrated pest management practices, and ultimately get clean product to the shelves so that you can make a dollar. So your company's successful, your employees have a job, and they have a revenue stream, and everybody's kind of happy across the board.
Got it.
I hope that covered it enough.
I definitely think it does. And, you know, one thing that I see quite often is you know, just in full transparency, I get such a broad view from coast to coast of what these facilities look like. It is very common practice for me to walk into a facility and don absolutely zero PPE. And I actually can see this from space to space. I see this walking through a facility. It brings me to something that I think, again, is an overlooked but very important thing. So access control. So I'm going to put this in the form of a question, but should I have to wear scrubs if I'm going from cultivation to my kitchen or from my kitchen to my lab? Is there concern there as well? I mean,
So personally, and this is just, in Darrin's world, right? However other people do it, I see people do things on, of course, LinkedIn. I see people.
Yep.
It's not my place to tell them what to do, right? If they want me to come in and give them some advice, I'll give them some comments. And it's always in the best interest of the product, the employees, and the consumer, and obviously overall health of the company. But, I would not have employees from cultivation going into my kitchen, as an example. Those are two completely separate functions. I talk about cultivation, I talk about cannabis production. Cultivation is a department within itself, and those individuals should be in cultivation. Processing and extraction is a department within itself, and those individuals should be within processing and extraction. If they need materials, well, that's why you have an inventory control department that manifests that product from cultivation to processing, and you have a transfer process, right, to ensure that you're documenting it and you're ensuring who's doing what, and you're not just taking product, cutting some plants down and then running them over to extraction, the growers doing it. And that's how you cause cross-contamination. You wouldn't find that in general manufacturing practices, in like pharmaceutical companies of that things of that nature. Same thing with the kitchen. They're going to receive that finished distillate or crude or whatever they're going to end up doing, live products, whatever they're going to end up solving those products, infusing into their edible products. That is no different than cultivation. They're going to manifest it. It's going to be packaged. It's going to be secured. Inventory control is going to handle that process, and you're going to get it in the kitchen, and you're going to document how you make those products. Everything from magnets to make sure that you don't end up with washers in your cookies, or, I've seen it all, right? I've seen all kinds of different things like that. So there's very important processes they have to follow.
Okay.
To mitigate those issues.
And so I think to sum up what you just said on the last two questions is, having separation from departments is extremely important. Having, separation from and access points of separation. So investors, contractors, all the way to your employees coming in. It's very important to consider these points at which PPE should be considered. But again, this goes all the way back into that first topic that we talked to about design flow and production design, and really starting to sit down and think about how are people entering my building? What are the steps that they're going to take when they do have to go from department to department? The last thing on PPE, Darrin, that I want to discuss with you, and I just want to bring this out. In my experience, one of the major things is probably one of the easiest things to overlook because we all live with this. Is this an issue to have in my garden?
Yeah. So just to go back to a little bit, that ties into your biosecurity once again. And all those PPE that we just talked about, that needs to be incorporated in the SOPs, right? So there's process control. But yes, cell phones, and this takes me back to 2011, I want to say 2012, where, we hand trimmed everything. And there's a lot of groups that still do that. And all the employees wanted to have their cell phones. And so in order to help them understand the concern of, everybody uses their cell phones and people go to the bathroom and they're sitting there scrolling, and, yes, we hope they wash their hands, but, did they wash their cell phones? Probably not. So what I did was I had a third-party lab come in, and I had some volunteers give their cell phones to be able to be swabbed, and we actually did a culture on it. The things that came back were atrocious. It was blind. We didn't say everybody, hey, this is whose cell phone this was, of course, right? There's integrity in that. But yeah, that is a major issue. And I totally understand people want to listen to their own music and do all this kinds of fun stuff. You have to remember that, especially now, a lot of the requirements in cannabis require GMP, right? So everything from, earrings and eye rings and nose rings and all of those types of things, you have to take that into consideration in which department within you want to work, right? Where you're placing your employees, and are they continuing those practices in production, right? I mean, I have on my wedding band, it's one of those silicone rings. A lot of times I'll take it off just because I don't want to get caught in anything and lose a finger. I deal with mixing machines and soil mixers and all kinds of things. So conveyor belts, you name it. So those are just things you got to take into consideration, right? And certainly cell phones are part of that. If you have your cell phone in and you're jamming out some music, but you're trimming with scissors, or you're trimming with a piece of equipment that has a motorized trimmer, you might lose a finger. And the company may want to consider having restrictions on those. And everybody goes on breaks, everybody goes, on lunch, so they have access to their phone during those times. But, you want to make sure you have hand wash sinks strategically placed by requirement for GMP, so they can clean their hands and prevent the spread of those things. And once again, that should all be incorporated into your SOPs.
Awesome.
So,
all right. So I love that. Thank you. I had to call out cell phones specifically from some past experience in my life, because I think if any of those ex-employees are watching this, they're not surprised that I bring it up. So then my next thing that I want to talk about, Darrin, is a vector point. This is something that, since I've started at Terra Vera and really dug into the IPM world, and really considered how it is that we think about the prevention of crop loss. We think about the way that things are moving from room to room, everything else. Can you just give me a brief, what are vector points, and what are the kind of the key topics on what to consider with vector points when thinking about crop loss, and how to avoid, not doing this?
Yeah. Vector is obviously, a transfer, introduction of, potential problem into an environment, right? As hard as it may be to hear, humans are oftentimes the greatest vector. And that comes back to PPE, and that comes back to biosecurity, right? If growers are operators, or anyone in your department, right? Doesn't matter if they're in processing or whatever, admin. If they're growing at home, which a lot of states include home cultivation, Florida doesn't, where I am. But if it does include home cultivation, they could have problems at their home. All right, and they can easily bring those in. And it doesn't just mean growing cannabis, by the way. I had a client, this is like 2013, 2014, years ago. They kept on having spider mites, and they're like, Darrin, I just don't know what's going on. And we're attacking the issue, and we were diminishing it, but then bam, of course, things come back. And I happened to know this person pretty well, and went over to their house. And as soon as I was entering to their house, I was like, oh man, you got spider mites all over the bush right by the front door. And I mean, the next time I came over, he had ripped the bush out. I mean, he just tore it out. So it's not just cannabis plants, right? It's your tomato plants, it's your garden, it's seasonal. So, you got to think about those types of things, and what you could be bringing into your facility. So the other vector points, the other potential vectors, are just your consumables, right? The products, your media. I've seen all kinds of atrocious things come in media, from plastic to rocks to bugs, for certainly. So
heavy
those
metals.
are really heavy metal. Oh gosh, yeah, all kinds of things. In media. So those are really things that you got to take into consideration. Your vendors, right? Who you have business relationships with, and how you guys are cross-validating to ensure that you're bringing in the best consumables to ensure that your product is safe, right? And then even vectoring between rooms, right? Let's face it, indoor grows, greenhouses, whatever the case may be, these issues happen. They happen often, right? I mean, that's the whole reason Terra Vera exists. We're in business is to not just fix those problems, but we wanted to do it in a safe fashion, right? We want to do it in a safe fashion that's beneficial for the plant and safe for the employees. We're passionate about that. So, let's just say mother stock, right? I see it a lot on mother stock, HLV or mites or aphids or whiteflies, thrift, you name it, and then you're cutting clones off that. Of course, your clones are going to have that pest pressure. So if you're not implementing dips or processes, you can sachet the hell out of a mother with all types of Swarovski and all kinds of stuff. But if your problem is so great, your predators are only going to do so much. So and you're transferring it now to your clone room, then you're going to transfer that to your veg room. So thinking about how that process and how you treat from an IPM perspective is very important to ensure you're not vectoring those pests throughout your entire garden. Right. And then making sure those individuals in your clone department aren't going into your flower rooms or your veg room, transferring those problems even further down the line. So vectoring is a very serious issue.
So, and to just go back to PPE real quick on this, guys, one of the things that I just want to say when it comes to vector points is, I see this a lot where I go into a room with a problem that we're gonna tackle using Terra Vera. So I'll use powdery mildew again, since everybody can relate to this. I'll go into this room. I'll visually see the powdery mildew. I'll see it in the room. We'll talk about it. I will then exit that room and then go into another room without changing my PPE. At that point, I am the human vector, to go back to Darrin's point. Make sure that while we're doing this, you're considering those very small steps. And this goes back to your employees, your investors, your contractors, anybody that's there. Vector points are a very serious thing. So I just wanted to add that in. All right, so I think
one last thing on vectoring, outside of people, your equipment, right? Your carts, your bins, and most specifically your scissors, your fiskers, right? If you're cloning from mothers, we're not using razor blades, but you're going from mother to mother, you have the potential to transfer, lettuce sclerosis, cryptic cannabis, a number of different diseases, right? So understanding your equipment, your sterilization, aseptic technique with your equipment, it's no different than a surgeon in a surgical room working on a patient and then taking that same scalpel and be like, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Let me go do surgery on the next patient. Obviously, there's processes to mitigate those risks of spreading from plant to plant and to department to department throughout your production.
Okay, so thank you for that, Darrin. I do want to say, if there's any questions out there, it doesn't look like we have any yet, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in that chat and we will tackle them. In the background where you guys can't see, we've got this cool little chat box going. So if there are any questions out there about what we've talked to so far, we will be happy to answer them. But until then, I guess we'll just kind of keep going. So Darrin, the next part, I think, for me anyways, this is something that I'm seeing way more often now, genetic acquisition and strategy behind that. So why is this important when it comes to crop failure? What could happen? What could go wrong?
So many things. So cannabis, I've been in it for a long time, had many great strains in my life, many great varieties. And, I'm certainly guilty of this in my own life. So, please take a note that everything here, a lot of this stuff is learned, right? Because you make mistakes in life, right? And I've just been fortunate enough to have been in it long enough to had my licks. So genetic acquisition. Everybody wants the new, right? Everybody wants what's hot. What's hot in the cannabis industry, right? So I can increase my revenue, obviously. And the problem with trying to always get the new, you really got to validate your source, and you got to make sure that when you're getting cuts from somebody, clones from somebody, even a clone producer that is validated, right? You're like, wow, this guy's well known on, multiple forums, yada, yada, yada. You want to make sure that not just they're providing documentation that says, hey, this is HLV free, pest free, etc. Even if you do take that genetic in, you want to make sure you quarantine it and you want to validate it yourself. There's plenty of different, companies that you can utilize to test for a different pathogens, right? And different diseases that can completely destroy your garden. I've seen it firsthand. So I know exactly how that can be. So it's a really easy thing to do. A lot of these tests are like $16, $20, So it's like, why wouldn't you spend $20 to make sure that your plant doesn't have HLV or lettuce sclerosis or something like that? And I'm not going to spread it to all my moms. So that's a really simple, easy thing to do. The other thing is, obviously pest pressure. That's the other reason you're isolating it and you're putting it under scope. You want to see what it has. So you can very quickly, easily dunk something in something that's, approved within your state. Still isolate it before you decide to mother it out or introduce it to your general population veg, your general population mom, or your flower production, right? So really simple steps to do. But I also would tell people, and this comes to facility design, this comes to all of it, expect the worst, right? Plan for the worst. Don't just say plan for the greatest thing that's ever going to happen. So, if you're bringing in genetics that could potentially be diseased, have a relationship with a company, and Phylos comes to mind just because I've known those guys for years and they've been doing this in the space for a while. But there's, Dr. Mark Lewis out in California. There's lots of great resources for genetics so that in the event you have a catastrophic failure or a significant disease pressure, you can introduce seeds that are vetted, that are validated, or introduce a autoflower as an example. Autoflowers, I feel like get a bad name, but you know what? No crop is pretty bad too. So if you can introduce something,
I was going to say that auto flower, that's a different session. I don't think we have time to talk about the bad.
No, probably not. No time for that. But having a genetic solution is really important, and that doesn't just apply to testing your genetics. It's beyond that. So we can talk about that for another day.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. So we do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one is do you think it is valuable to have someone from outside of your organization look through SOPs, overall strategy for IPM? Sometimes you can just be a little too close to see it. So I'm just going to I'll take the first crack at this. And then Darrin, I'm going to let you kind of finish it off. But I absolutely think that this is a really wise decision. There are a lot of great resources out there when it comes from consultative services. So, I mean, we've got Ryan Douglas out there. You've got Eric Branson. You've got Darrin Potter. There are a lot of people that are out there that are willing to help and look at this that have a ton of experience. I think, when you're too close into the issue, you do get your blinders on. It's unpreventable. I've been in this situation multiple times, and being in startups for the last 9 years unfortunately you can't see everything. So I think having somebody review these processes, review your strategy, looking at IPM specifically from a Terra Vera perspective, this is our passion. This is what we do. Allow us to come in and really look at IPM as a whole and develop a strategy for you guys, or a company like Terra Vera for that matter. So I say 100% on this. I think that bringing in a third set of eyes, a fourth set of eyes, is gonna pay for itself in the long run.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on that. You don't always have to take everybody's advice, but it's good to get some opinions. And yeah, like you said, Ryan, Susan, Bug Lady, there's tons of resources out there that are vetted, right? That are, been around the block. They've seen a lot of things. They can support you. If you're living in a box, you're never going to know what's outside of it. So look outside and find resources. And I do this a lot. I did this for a client in New Mexico recently, and it wasn't even in cultivation. It was in processing. They asked me a question, and I said, hey, here's an army of resources. Talk to them. And, save yourself maybe a couple $100,000, but also, find a solution that's going to fit your problem that you're facing right now. Don't just live in that box, because, there's a value to getting other people's opinions, because you get to learn from all of their mistakes as opposed to just living through them by yourself. And, when you didn't have to. So.
Absolutely. It kind of brings up something that I feel like a broken record in this industry. I've said this so many times. Cannabis specifically, and this is everyone. This is not just cannabis specific, but being reactive versus proactive is a huge problem. And I think that this is a very proactive thing that people can do right from the start. So get in front of your problems using experts in the field, get in front of your problems using the right equipment, get in front of your problems using somebody that's going to design production flow properly for you. Don't wait until that reactive place that we wind up having an issue to start making the correct decisions. All right. So then we have, this is a really big question. And this is a good one. So far for a well-run cultivation, is it possible, in your opinion, to beat out the quality and cost and price of the legacy market grower?
I like that you said legacy market grower.
Like that?
Well, yeah, because it's definitely a term probably more acceptable these days. But let's get into it. And being from legacy world myself, yes, I'm a plant biologist. Yes, I've been in the legal world for a long, long time now. I haven't delved back into the legacy world because I'm wildly afraid to. And I just don't see the point for me. And I do have friends that have gone back to that world,
Sure.
Because living in legal market and MSO world, sometimes it can be a challenge. So 100% legal cannabis can and will 100% will eventually beat out the black market. It's just a matter of time. The legal cannabis market has resources that, wild amounts of money, and obviously the illicit market, legacy market does as well. But it is inevitable that the legal market will obviously, rise and standardize and become the conventional production process for agriculture for cannabis. And I push a lot. I strive really, really hard to drag the cannabis industry and market into mainstream agriculture because that's where I came from. So I have a passion to do that. And it's not just from a, access standpoint. It's not just from, quality and standardization. It's also from an environmental standpoint. When you think about, like, just say indoor grows as an example, the number of indoor grows in the U.S. is equivalent to adding 3.3 million cars on the highway, right? So when you're thinking about how you produce cannabis, you might want to consider from an environmental standpoint. That's one of the reasons I got involved in Terra Vera, because from an environmental standpoint, the applications we're doing are safe for the planet, they're safe for people, they're safe for bees. And I talk about that kind of stuff a lot. And I just feel like cannabis, while we've talked a lot about, and I'm all for it, social equity, things of that nature, a lot of people aren't talking about the environmental impact right now. And I'm hoping that someday that will come to the forefront, and it will be a talking point, because what we're doing to this planet and the ways that we produce cannabis currently, well, let's just say it's not friendly to our environment. And a lot of agriculture isn't, right? It's not the greatest thing for our environment. We got to produce food. We got to feed people. So we have to start thinking in lines of how we're going to produce everything from cannabis to other products in a sustainable way for people, the planet, and and bees.
Yeah. And I agree with this. I think that, much like, look at agriculture, to your point. Majority of us do not go and out into the backyard and pick all our vegetables for a salad. And there's a reason for that. Is this takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And as this industry scales and as this industry becomes more standardized, I really do believe that the legal industry is the only way that we remove the illicit sale of cannabis. I think the illicit sale will always be there because, hey, I've got a bud who's got a friend, everybody does.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be that niche market for it. However, I do think that if a cultivation facility and a company, or however you want to put it, is being considerate to all the things that you spoke about. So they're being considerate to the environment. They're being considerate to the end user and who's going to have to actually consume that product. If they're being considerate to their employees, they're being considerate to the state by following regulations and paying taxes and supporting an economy. I think that the more we can, as an industry, get into exactly what you're talking about, is really stay focused on environmental practices, sustainability, consistency. I think that absolutely we will wind up, feeding the illicit market.
Yeah, and I want to touch on one more thing about the legacy market, and I'm not opposed to it by any means. Just want to say that there's a lot of great people who have been doing this for a long time, who have made the transition, and there's a lot of people who just they don't have the financial wherewithal, or they haven't had the ability to transition. I hope they do. But
it's also really how we all got here. I'm just going to come out and say that. So
I wouldn't be here without,
exactly.
That was the precursor to my life before I got into the legal market.
Absolutely.
But really quick, and the reason why I see this happening, right, is because you picked this up earlier, right? And we are humans, and what we want is convenience. That's what everybody wants. So when there is so much biomass out there, when there's so many pre-rolls, when there's so many eighths, when there's so many gummies, when there's so much out there, and it's almost Amazon style, right? You're delivering it. There will still be in a legacy market, an illicit market. It just won't be the way that it was ever again. And it won't be the way that it is today, right? It's going to change just like everything does. So just take that into consideration. It's not going to disappear. Nothing disappears. I know people who still moonshine, and I might have a thing of shine in the back. But that said, mainstream, the world, I'm going to go up to ABC liquor store or, whatever, and pick up my liquor, because it's all a matter of convenience and price point. And that's why I think someday it will. And one thing I just want to say, because I know our time's like 1 minute, there's two things in life that you can't live without: water and a farmer. Just keep that in mind. Remember.
I love that. I don't have any catchy two things that I'm going to say at the end, but I just want to say thank you, Darrin, for your time. Thank you for anybody that stopped in. This was a lot of fun to publicly have a conversation, Darrin. I feel like we just got to talk on the phone for an hour, but instead I get to see your face, and so does everyone else.
Can we do this again?
I sincerely hope so, Darrin.
All right, let's have a date. Let's set a date, and let's do another live stream, and let's see if we can invite some friends maybe next time, and get some other opinions. I would love to do that. I'd love to hear our network's opinions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your time, Darrin.
No problem. Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too.